Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning, everyone. I am Saliha, di Kasaran Oranggaga. Finally, we are down to the last topic for the reporting for this course. I present to you the critical pedagogies. This has four subtopics. We have the language revitalization and critical language pedagogy, from which I will be discussing today, and of course, my partner's topic, Ma'am Donna Cortez, to discuss translanguaging and how the curricula contains power and hegemony. I have here, I think, a very familiar image commonly used when discussing pedagogy. In this image, we can see here that the teacher wishes to conduct an assessment that is not much to the individual needs of his students, which is in this image viewed as animals. This is just the point of Albert Einstein that everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish, I have here, I think, a very familiar image commonly used when discussing pedagogy. In this image, we can see here that the teacher wishes to conduct an assessment that is not much to the individual needs of his students, which is in this image viewed. But what is critical pedagogy? What are its goals? And but what is Before digging deep on this topic, let us first note that when we refer to something as being critical, we naturally judge, analyze, and study something. In this case, scholars made use of the word critical because their ideas was derived after having thorough analysis of the use of the traditional model of teaching. Later, we shall have clear distinction of those two theories. We cannot begin our introduction of critical pedagogy unless we mention the name of the famous Brazilian scholar, literacy programs director, and curriculum influencer, Paulo Freire, the founder of the critical pedagogy. In the year 1947, Freire became the director of the Department of Education and Culture in Brazil and began series of literacy programs. It was during this time that he developed his ideas of the differences and relations of oppression, literacy, and educational praxis. Freire criticizes the traditional model of teaching from which he referred to as banking models of education, from which students are treated as. We cannot begin our introduction of critical pedagogy unless we mention the name of the famous Brazilian scholar, literacy programs director, and curriculum influencer, Paulo Freire, the founder of the critical pedagogy. In the year 1947, Freire became the director of the Department. Building more scholars following his ideas, Freire's ontology states that the ultimate goal of all person is to increase. Building more scholars following his ideas, Freire's ontology states that the ultimate goal of all person is to increase, not to decrease, their humanity. In the same way that the colonizer thinks that his own is the only best, the teacher that thinks that his ideas are always the right one, and that the students are like hollow vessels with nothing inside it, is unconscious. brought about by the previous discussion on the relationship of teacher and students in the traditional model. Freire published his most famous work, The Critical Pedagogy Model, in 1967, that effective education is built upon the democratic relationship between equals were opening to one another. This relationship between the students and the teacher promotes critical awareness. Freire published his most famous work, The Critical Pedagogy Model, in 1967, that effective education is built in critical pedagogy. The usual approaches which occasionally happens is the teacher problematizes, then the student poses solutions, and then both of them work. In critical pedagogy, the usual approach scholars who are very fond of studying a language by being critical usually focus on the language revitalization of a language. However, why is there a need of language revitalization? And in a world of around 250 nations, there are over 7,000 languages. This means that there are very few languages of a country of its own. A language that is not a language of government, accordingly, nor a language of education, nor a language of commerce or of wider communication, is a language whose very existence is threatened in the modern world. We question ourselves, why does it matter that the linguistic diversity of the world is diminishing? And in a world of around 250 nations, there are over 7,000 languages. This means that there are very few languages of a country of its own. A language that is not a language of government, accordingly, nor a language of education, nor a language of commerce or of wider communication, is a language whose very existence is threatened in the modern world. We question ourselves, why does it matter that the linguistic diversity of the world is diminishing? And why should anyone care if indigenous groups shift from their ancestral tongue to a world language like the English language? These are questions which we barely have in our minds because we are too engrossed with the patronization of foreign countries' languages. Nowadays, we call our friends amigo, amiga, a Spanish term. Among the Merna, for example, the Merna people, no one is already naming their children Maranao terminologies. We go for the Arabic terminologies. In fact, personally, my name Saliha actually originated from an Arabic term which means good. So, classmates, we are now in the midst of our topic and I want to see whether we are still there listening. That's why let us have a speedy task to do in our chat box. So, you have to comment at least one first name in your mother tongue. So think of a relative, think of your folks who are having this first name which is originating from a Cebuano or Higayon or Maranao mother tongue. Among anyone from your clan that you can remember. Going back to our questions earlier, why does it matter that the linguistic diversity of the world is diminishing? And why should anyone care if indigenous groups shift from their ancestral tongue to a world language? Here is the response. The loss of a language is part of the loss of whole cultures and knowledge systems, including philosophical items, oral literary, and musical traditions, environmental knowledge system, medical knowledge, and important culture practices and artistic skills. I want to cite an example from the case of the Havasupai bilingual education. This Havasupai people are actually American Indian tribe. We cannot really assure, in fact, that even if all the families are still using a language at home, there still might be danger signs. And we have to be very cautious to that, even to our own mother tongue right now, such as the loss of the domains of vocabulary. The Havasupai bilingual education program that was put into places 25 years ago from this time on was designed for children who were native speakers of the Havasupai language but who were showing sign of language contractions, that is, they tended not to know certain domains of vocabulary or certain aspects of grammar, or to lack of formal speaking or storytelling skills. Now, if we try to reflect on our own, are we that good in terms of our mother tongue? The goal of that revitalization program in that case was to remedy or put remedial intervention to the children's incomplete learning of their own native tongue. Language revitalization takes place in communities that are undergoing language shift. It has two purposes, that is to halt or reverse the decline of a language. Some scholars, however, language revitalization takes place in communities that are undergoing language shift. It has two purposes, that is to halt or reverse the decline of a language. Some scholars, however, provided a distinction between these two purposes. The first one is language revival. This is when the resurrection of an extinct language is applied with no existing native speakers. And the next one is the language revitalization, which is the rescue of the dying of or a dying language. The case of the Havasupai language, which I had just mentioned earlier, falls under the program of language revitalization. However, so far as my research had been enough, here are some approaches that can be useful in developing a language revitalization program. We have school-based programs. These are the activities conducted within a school. We also have the children's program outside the school. So this could involve the literacy programs conducted in the park or in the summer classes of the younger children. We also have the adult language program. This is the very crucial one because in this generation that we are now, even the adult people are not very, I'm sorry to say this, but they are not, or we are not very into using our own mother tongue when dealing with the socialization of other people. Like for example, when we meet our friends, although we have similar mother tongue, we do not speak in our own mother tongue, but rather we speak according to those languages that we consider elite, like the English language. We also have documentation and materials development and home-based programs. Here are some approaches that can be useful in developing a language revitalization program. We have school-based programs. These are the activities conducted within a school. We also have the children's program outside the school. So this could involve the We are done with language revitalization, and now let us contextualize the discussions that we just have right now and try to connect it with our program, the English language studies. So I have been talking here about pedagogy, and finally, here we are in the critical language pedagogy to finally correlate the implementation of critical pedagogy in language studies. To guide us, let us keep in our mind that we will try to navigate ourselves. We are done with language revitalization, and now let us contextualize the discussions that we just have right now and try to connect. Critical language pedagogy is a perspective on teaching second, additional, heritage, or other languages that is based in values of social justice. Critical language pedagogy is a perspective on teaching second, additional, heritage, or other languages that is based in values of social justice. To give us a gist, here are the components of the CLP, or the critical language pedagogy. So we have first one, teacher's critical oppositional stance. So if you can notice, if a teacher is very against about a specific topic or issues towards the government, naturally some of her or his students would actually go on with such kind of stand. So it is really important that the teacher, even though within the classroom, must observe the use of language in terms of declaring her or his critical oppositional stance. The next one is we have the critical needs analysis. Next one, we also have the negotiated syllabus, the codes, dialogue, participatory material development, critical participatory democratic assessment, and the action oriented. To give us a gist, here are the components of the CLP, or the critical language pedagogy. So we have first one, here are the features of the CLP. One can have focus on learners' current situation and or long terms in fostering equity and justice for all. So if the teacher observes this CLP, we would notice that his students will be equipped with the awareness of what is happening around them. This is a good method to engage the students in being exposed to the number two, materials usually brought in from the real world or made. So since you are doing this language that is happening or that is being used around them in the real environment, plus you are using materials that you brought outside from the real world inside the classroom, then that would sum up into the students being an efficient individual right now or in the future. Lastly, Similar to TPR, or the total physical response, the CLP can be used as much or as little as needed or as possible. So if we can still recall the TPR, the use of the TPR is the engagement of the students in one specific language with the combination of physical activities or physical response. So in that manner, within the classroom, when you are observing the TPR, you do not apply the TPR for the rest of the sessions of your class. You only do that at the beginning of your class. So that is also similar with the CLP, because when you are using the CLP towards the session or towards the school year, you cannot be too firm in promoting social justice, because the students are, especially in the middle school and in the lower level, the students are not yet very ready for engaging themselves into such kind of issues like the gender issues, the racism, because they have this more important things to develop first before engaging themselves into providing solution to that kind of social injustices. Still, in relation to the features of the CLP, we also have problems that we can actually encounter when dealing with the CLP. First one, you can have opposition from administration and parents. So one particular example that we can come up here is when you are a teacher who is very supportive of the LGBTQ+. So if you are keeping on doing orientation, discussion, open forums about this kind of gender issue, the administrators of your school or your institution, even the parents, would react negatively towards that kind of immediate orientation towards that kind of issue. Very sad, but it is true. The next one, you have the difficult to make own materials or have students bring in materials. Typically, yes, you can afford at least one time per month or one time per week where you can bring a realistic material that could discuss something about social injustice or social justice. But the problem is, it is always hard to find that kind of materials that you can brought inside the classroom, which is in the form of a realia. So later, at later part of this discussion, I'll be giving you some examples which could give us an idea in alternative of that kind of realia or a very heavy or very spacious materials. The next one is the difficulty in finding local groups that deal with social justice issues. So it will be very tasky as well if you are going to invite somebody to come over inside your classroom or in the school to talk about social injustice using a specific language. The next is teacher forcing own belief on students. So sometimes teacher brought their personal perspective on some specific issues to the point that they appear like they are forcing their own belief on their students to do or to believe this same kind of approach in dealing with some trendy or some timely social issues. Here are some sample activities I have told you earlier and materials which can be employed inside a classroom. We have role plays that involves problem situations. You can give the students a topic and then they're going to have this little role play session from which they're going to be the one who is going to prepare a script and then resolve that kind of conflicts. Next, we have the writing up a marriage contract. So naturally, the big issues that we usually hear from the social media or even from the stories in the Facebook or in the TikTok is a question about the relationship of couples. So as early as in high school, for example, we have to prepare our students on how to engage themselves into this kind of interrelationship. So as early as now, that you can actually involve them into writing a marriage contract. What does it take, or what does it involve for two persons to get into marriage? So that is an open-ended questions. So we also have the planning menu for the school cafeteria. So as simple as that, you can also make your students think of how to manage, how to budget the expenses that they have, in or by having them plan for a menu that is accessible, that is easy and convenient for the students like them. Next is reading a graphic novel about issues in other countries. So you can have them read articles, for example, or stories or blogs that they are actually familiar about, or even when they're familiar about, but something that would interest them and steer their capacity on reading such kind of graphics. Next is debate. Okay, they really love debate. Students really love debate, especially those who are in the intermediate level. So if you are trying to have the use of the CLP to be engaged into the debates, you can actually use specific motions that would stir up their mind in standing one's philosophy or standing one's stance according to a specific motion. Next is the describing students' identity. So as early as being high schoolers, they can be exposed to asking themselves about their own self, understanding oneself. Next, we also have the graphic novel. It is similar to the one that I talked about kanina. We also have the newspapers, textbook pictures or dialogue, and comments on the internet. They are very fond of this one. So all of this can be used for the approaches of CLP. And finally, here are the references I had used in compiling information for my report. Thank you for listening.